They thought it was a two-headed beast. In 1519, Aztecs stared as Spanish horses charged, their hooves splitting the earth. Plains, tribes, had no word for this creature. Yet, by 1650, Apache raiders stole these monsters and struck from their backs. Comanche warriors followed, bending warfare itself. Horses brought power, speed, and hope. But as herds thundered north, so did empire's greed. Could this animal save the tribes, or would it pull them into a bloodier fight? The image of Native Americans galloping across the Great Plains, bows drawn, hunting buffalo, feels ancient. It's etched into our minds like a timeless painting. But that picture is newer than you'd think. Horses weren't always part of their world. They were a revolution that hit hard and fast, reshaping lives in a matter of generations. Long before Columbus, horses roamed North America. These weren't the Mustangs we know today, but a different breed, called Hegemon horses. They grazed alongside mammoths and saber-toothed cats. By 8000 BC, they were gone. Wiped out. Some say climate shifts dried up their grasslands. Others point to human hunters, spears in hand, taking down the last of them. Either way, when the first Native Americans crossed the Bering Land Bridge, they walked. No saddles, no reins, just their feet on the earth. For millennia, the continent stayed horseless. Tribes like the Apache and Comanche moved on foot, their dogs dragging travois loaded with tippy poles and hides. Then, in 1492, everything changed. Christopher Columbus stepped onto a Caribbean shore, his ships carrying more than men. Tucked below deck were horses Spanish breeds, lean and battle-hardened. They were the first to touch North American soil since those ancient Hegemon herds vanished. By 1499, the Spanish had set up shop on Hispaniola. They bred horses fast, building herds to fuel their conquests. These weren't pets. They were war machines, bred for soldiers to ride down enemies. Stables spread across the island, hooves churning the dirt. The Spanish knew what they had, a weapon that could break worlds. In 1519, Hernán Cortés landed in Mexico with 600 men and 16 horses. The Aztecs didn't know what hit them. Warriors froze, eyes locked on these massive creatures charging forward. Men fused to their backs like centaurs. Some whispered of gods, others saw monsters. The Aztecs' obsidian-tipped clubs were no match for cavalry. Horses gave the Spanish speed, height, and terror. By 1521, Tenochtitlan fell. The animals' role was undeniable. They turned battles into slaughters. The Spanish pushed deeper, their sights on the Inca Empire. In 1532, Hernando Pizarro led a small force into Peru, backed by enough horses to overwhelm. Again, the locals had no frame of reference. No one had seen a horse since their ancestors hunted Hegemon herds 10,000 years ago. The Spanish rode through, leaving blood and broken empires in their wake. Horses weren't just tools. They were a psychological hammer, shattering resistance before swords even swung. By 1538, the Spanish reached what's now Florida, hauling horses onto the mainland north of Mexico. They weren't sightseeing. These were expeditions of conquest, and horses were their edge. De Soto's men rode through swamps and forests, their mounts slogging through mud. The locals watched, wary, as these strange beasts stamped the earth. No one yet dared approach them. The Spanish kept moving north, through Mexico, and into what's now the American Southwest. By 1610, they'd planted a flag in Santa Fe, calling the region New Mexico. They named the local tribes Pueblo for their adobe villages, some perched on cliffs, others sprawling across valleys. These were the descendants of the Anasazi, builders of stone cities. The Spanish brought horses, just as they had against the Aztecs and Inca. They rode into Pueblo lands, expecting to dominate. But the Spanish guarded their advantage. Horses were their steel-tipped spear against tribes armed with bows and spears. They passed laws banning Native Americans from riding or owning horses. Violators faced lashes or worse. The Spanish weren't stupid, they knew a mounted enemy could match them. Their rancheros, sprawling cattle ranches, relied on native laborers, some indentured, who tended livestock. These workers brushed against horses daily, mucking stalls, hauling feed. A few learned to ride, guiding herds across open land. Skills spread quietly, like sparks in dry grass. The Spanish couldn't stop it. By the 1650s, whispers of rebellion stirred. Pueblo workers eyed the horses they weren't supposed to touch. Some stole a few, slipping away under moonlight. Others watched, learning how to handle reins, how to sit a saddle. The knowledge seeped out, impossible to contain. It wasn't the Plains tribes, yet not the Comanche or Sioux, but the seeds were sown. Horses were no longer just Spanish. They were becoming something else entirely. Dust swirled as hooves struck the earth. By the 1650s, shadows moved fast across the southern plains. Apache raiders, once on foot, now charged on stolen horses. They hit Spanish settlements like lightning, then vanished into the dusk. No one saw it coming. The Spanish had brought the horse to crush resistance, but now it turned against them. The plains were waking up, and the hooves were only the beginning. In the 1650s, a new kind of warrior appeared. The Lea Apache, as the Spanish called them, swept down from the north. They weren't the foot-bound raiders of a decade before. Now they rode. Hard. Their horses, snatched from Pueblo rancheros, carried them over vast stretches of scrub and sand. Spanish outposts burned. Adobe walls crumbled under the shock of mounted attacks. The Apache weren't just fighting, they were rewriting the rules. They were the first Native American tribe to master the horse, the first to turn a Spanish weapon into their own. No one knows exactly who first swung onto a horse's back. The Apache watched the Spanish closely, eyeing their saddles, their stirrups, their reins. They mimicked what they saw. They mounted from the right, just as the Spanish Dida habit traced back to the Berbers of North Africa, who'd shaped Spain's cavalry centuries earlier. Using rawhide and wood, the Apache crafted their own saddles, crude but effective. They didn't need perfection, they needed speed. Raids on Pueblo villages and Spanish ranches brought more horses. Some were traded, others stolen under moonlight. A horse trade network sparked to life, spreading animals and skills across the southern plains. But the Apache didn't worship the horse, they ate it. Most captured horses ended up as meat, their hides stretched for shelters or shields. Only the strongest, fastest mounts were spared for riding. This wasn't the romantic galloping of Western films. Forget John Wayne's Stagecoach, with Apache riders circling wagons, arrows flying from horseback. That's fiction. The Apache used horses for movement, not combat. They rode to the edge of a settlement, dismounted, and fought on foot with bows and clubs. Then they leapt back onto their mounts and bolted. A Spanish musket couldn't catch them. This mobility changed everything. Raids covered hundreds of miles, retreats left no trace. The southern plains, once a place of slow treks, became a battleground of speed. The Apache weren't the plains tribes of legend, not yet. They stayed south, in the rugged lands of modern New Mexico and Arizona. Their horse culture was raw, practical, and brutal. It gave them power, but not mastery. That would come later, from others. Then, in 1680, the world shifted. The Pueblo people, crushed under Spanish rule, rose up. The Great Pueblo Revolt erupted across New Mexico. Adobe villages turned to battlegrounds. Spanish priests and soldiers fled south to Mexico, bloodied and broken. They left behind their herds thousands of horses, bred for war, now loose. The Pueblo didn't ride. They didn't know how. So the horses ran free, scattering across the Great Plains. Herds swelled, hooves carving paths through grass and sage. The plains, vast and open, became a sea of wild mustangs. These weren't just any horses, they were Iberian stock, brought by Spanish conquistadors. Their ancestors had thundered across Eurasian steppes, bred for endurance on open lands. The Moors, invading Spain in the 8th century, crossed them with Arabian breeds, forging lean, tough mustangs. These animals were born for the plains. They thrived in the dry grass, the endless horizons. Their hooves didn't falter on rocky slopes or in shallow rivers. By the late 1600s, tens of thousands roamed free, half wild, ready for the taking. Other tribes saw their chance. The Apache, already riding, traded horses northward. Ancient trade routes, once walked by foot, now carried hooves. Tribes like the Navajo and Ute began catching and taming these mustangs. Some learned from Apache riders, watching how they handled reins or steadied a mount. Others figured it out alone, wrestling wild horses into submission. The animals multiplied fast, their numbers exploding across the plains. A single herd could stretch a mile, dust rising like a storm. Tribes didn't just want horses, they needed them. From the east, another force stirred. French traders, pushing west from the Mississippi, brought more than beads and cloth. They carried muskets and iron axes, trading them to tribes like the Cree and Assiniboine. These weapons shifted power. Tribes armed with guns didn't just hunt better, they dominated. Traditional enemies, stuck with bows and spears, fell back. Some were driven west, onto the plains. This wasn't just trade. It was a ripple effect, a migration born of steel and powder. Tribes like the Sioux and Comanche, once far from the plains, were pushed into its heart. Among them were the Comanche. They started as a branch of the Shoshone, living in Wyoming's mountains in the early 1600s. But by 1680, they faced new pressure. Eastern tribes, flush with French guns, pressed west. The Comanche was squeezed, forced south toward the plains. Around this time, horses reached them. The nearby Pony tribe in Nebraska rode by 1680. Their herds likely traded from Apache or Pueblo sources. The Comanche didn't hesitate. They took to horses like fire to dry grass. By 1705, the Comanche had reached Texas. They weren't alone. The Navajo, Tonkawa, and even the forest-dwelling Cados had horses too. The southern plains hummed with hooves. But the Comanche stood out. They didn't just ride, they transformed. Their warriors learned to move as one with their mounts, weaving through battles with a grace that stunned onlookers. They weren't the first to ride, but they became the best. Their name would soon echo as the ultimate horse tribe, their raids a nightmare for settlers and rivals alike. Horses didn't just change movement, they reshaped power. A tribe with horses could hunt buffalo faster, cover more ground, and strike harder. But they also became targets. Raiding for horses became a way of life. A stolen herd could make a tribe, a lost one could break it. The plains were no longer a quiet expanse. They were a battleground where speed and skill decided survival. Hooves pounded the Texas plains. A Comanche warrior leaned low, his body pressed against his horse's flank. Arrows flew from his bow, slicing through the air. His enemies didn't see him, just a blur of horseflesh and dust. This wasn't just riding, it was a new kind of war. By the late 1600s, the Comanche had turned the horse into a weapon that broke empires and reshaped the Great Plains forever. The Comanche didn't just ride, they danced with their horses. By the 1680s, they'd honed a tactic that left observers stunned. George Catlin, a painter who traveled among native tribes, watched in awe. He described young Comanche men galloping at full speed, then dropping to one side of their mount. Their bodies hung horizontal, shielded by the horse's bulk. Only their heels hooked over the horse's back, holding them steady. From this position, they loosed arrows with deadly precision, their bows steady even at a dead run. They carried shields and 14-foot lances, weaving through battle like ghosts. Every young warrior trained for this, practicing until horse and rider moved as one. This wasn't Apache-style raiding, where horses were for transport. The Comanche fought from the saddle, redefining warfare in a way no Wyandot, even the Spanish, could match. They learned fast. The Apache had horses by the 1650s, striking settlements on foot after riding in. The Comanche, likely starting around 1680, took it further. In just a generation, they'd mastered mounted combat. Their horses, descendants of Spanish Mustangs, were perfect for the Plainslian, fast and tough. The Comanche didn't need Spanish saddles or stirrups. They rode bareback or with rawhide gear, their bodies attuned to every shift of the horse beneath them. This skill turned them into the Plains' most feared tribe, their raids a storm that swept from Texas to Kansas. By 1700, the horse wasn't just a Comanche weapon, it was everywhere. Records from 1705 show every major Plains tribe riding. From the Tonkawa in Texas to the Sioux in the Dakotas, horses spread like wildfire. Trade routes carried them north, as tribes swapped hides, weapons, and stolen mounts. Raids fueled the spread too. A tribe without horses was a target, their hunting grounds vulnerable. Stealing a herd could transform a tribe overnight, and every warrior knew it. The Plains became a chessboard where speed won battles. By 1750, tribes as far north as Canada hunted buffalo from horseback, their arrows striking from galloping mounts. It took practice years of it, but the Plains tribes adapted with breathtaking speed. Violence shaped this world. Horse raids weren't just theft, they were power grabs. A single raid could leave one tribe stronger and another broken. Tribes watched each other, learning fast. A warrior saw a rival ride, then copied the grip on the reins, the lean into a turn. Trade and raids weren't the only engines. The wild Mustang herds, freed during the 1680 Pueblo Revolt, multiplied across the plains. Tribes like the Ute and Shoshone tamed them, turning raw horsepower into survival. Far to the north, another story unfolded. The Blackfeet, living across Wyoming, Montana, and Alberta, hadn't seen horses before 1730. They called the time before Dog Days, when their travois wooden frames dragged by dogs carried their tippies and goods. Dogs were loyal but weak, hauling only what a man could carry. Horses changed everything. A single Mustang could pull twice the load, freeing warriors to hunt or fight. The Blackfeet's world turned upside down. In 1787, a trader named Daniel Thompson stayed with the Blackfeet. He sat with their elders, listening to stories of the past. They spoke of 1730, when the Shoshone attacked. The Blackfeet watched, stunned, as warriors charged on big dogs' horses they'd never seen. The Shoshone's hooves tore the earth, their arrows cutting down Blackfeet fighters. The battle was a rout. The Blackfeet had no answer for this speed, this power. They survived, but barely. Humiliated, the Blackfeet turned to allies. The Cree and Assiniboine, trading with French merchants, had muskets and men carried firearms, a rare edge. The Blackfeet joined them, forming a war party. They didn't just fight back, they stole Shoshone horses. By the next season, Blackfeet warriors rode, their own hooves shaking the ground. They struck the Sioux, the Crow, anyone who crossed their hunting grounds. A painting from the time shows Blackfeet riders torching Crow buffalo ranges, flames licking the grass as they galloped away. They weren't just a tribe anymore. They were a mounted force, as deadly as the Comanche far to the south. This wasn't just a Blackfeet story. It was the plains. Spanish horses came from the south, French guns from the east. The two collided, and the plains exploded into a new kind of warfare. Tribes like the Sioux, pushed west by armed rivals, took to horses just as fast. By 1750, the Great Plains were a mounted world, every major tribe riding, raiding, and hunting. The dog days were a memory, replaced by the thunder of hooves. Horses didn't just spread, they transformed. A tribe with horses could hunt buffalo in days, not weeks, their arrows striking from a gallop. They could raid a rival's camp and vanish before dawn. But power came with a price. Every horse stolen made enemies. Every raid invited revenge. Tribes grew stronger, but also more exposed. The plains became a crucible, where survival meant mastering the horse or losing everything. The speed of this change was staggering. In 1650, the Apache rode. By 1680, the Comanche followed. By 1705, every plains tribe had horses. In less than a century, a continent without horses became a world defined by them. Tribes didn't just adopt the horse, they became it, their lives woven into its rhythm. Raids, hunts, and migrations all moved to the beat of hooves. But as they rose, so did the shadow of empires, Spanish, French, and later American watching from the edges. Was the horse a savior, or a spark for chaos? It gave tribes power to fight, to hunt, to live faster and farther. But it also drew them into a cycle of raids and wars, each tribe arming the next. The plains were no longer a quiet expanse. They were a battleground where hooves wrote history in blood and dust. What do you think, did horses save the plains tribes, or pull them deeper into a fight they couldn't win? Drop your thoughts below.